Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast. Today we're talking with Chris Baiocchi. Chris is a consultant to nonprofits and helps them get the clarity and confidence they need. He's also a certified fundraising executive and was awarded the Fundraiser of the Year for the Orange County chapter of Fundraising Professionals.
You are the kind of person who wants to improve the lives of others, but you need to take pride in your everyday actions. You Are a Philanthropist believes that every act of goodwill deserves to be recognized as philanthropy. Each individual action you take impacts another's life. Believe that what you do makes a difference. So call yourself a philanthropist and start a ripple effect of generosity that boomerangs back to you. Go to youareaphilanthropist.com/shop. Style your outside to match your inside. Choose a t-shirt, hoodie, or bag to show how much you love giving to others. That's youareaphilanthropist.com/shop.
Hey y'all, I just want to remind you that I need you to subscribe, rate, and review to this podcast. If you're enjoying it and want more conversations like this and want to help people get more involved with philanthropy, please subscribe, rate, and review. I want to thank you to the people who have already rated this podcast 5 stars. Please click to rate it 5 stars. And here is some awesome reviews. I love hearing the different stories from a variety of people's personalities. We all can contribute with the strengths we have in making the world a better place for all of us to live in. Here's another one. I really enjoy this podcast. It's encouraging to see that I don't have to be a multimillionaire who created a philanthropic foundation to impact people. It's my small gifts of my time and resources that add up. I am a philanthropist. And here's another. There are opportunities all around at an early age to remind us to look out for each other. It's a lifelong journey of seeing the opportunities and acting in them. Thanks for a great reminder. Listeners, please do me a favor, subscribe, rate, and review right now so more people can hear more from us and learn more about philanthropy.
Welcome to the You Are a Philanthropist podcast with Jen Klein, a certified fundraising executive and philanthropic entrepreneur. This show is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you to make a difference in your community and our world. Jen believes all acts of kindness matter, and this show is designed to help you take pride in your everyday actions of improving the lives of others and making a change in the world. Now, here's Jen.
Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jen. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I love connecting with other fundraisers. And as you mentioned, you're another fundraiser from Orange County. And I have been having some guests from sunny California around those parts on the show recently. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. I like you, I love talking about fundraising. And so any chance I get to meet someone new and to talk a little bit about this industry, I'll take it. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's make sure we keep it fun in the fundraising, because I love to say fundraising because I've just enjoyed it for my career. I know you've been doing it for a long time as well. How long have you been in the nonprofit industry?
I've been in the nonprofit space for, I think, going on 25 years now. It was pretty much my first, right after college, I got a job at a newspaper because I was a journalism major. And it wasn't what I needed, apparently, because then I ended up moving into corporate communications for a nonprofit healthcare company. So I was doing strategic communications and corporate communication planning and all sorts of stuff. But what was really exciting about that time in my career was I was invited to sit on a committee called the Employee Giving Campaign. So this organization, St. Joseph Health System, had an annual employee giving campaign. So every year, all the employees could have the option to make a payroll deduction, donation to one of the ministries started by or supported by the organization. And it was there were like, I think 20 different charities you could choose to support. There were women's shelters and groups that worked with kids and education and community health. Really great. And I was a volunteer on this committee and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love. It was a really exciting thing I love to do. And I did it for 6 years. I was the co-chair of the committee. really fell in love with it. And that's how I got introduced to fundraising. And it was from there that I moved into fundraising as a full-time career and never looked back.
I used to run an employee giving program at my former school that I used to work for. And it's always very rewarding when you're working alongside your colleagues and you see them being generous with their time. Yes. And with it strikes me as something meaningful, not just because I know them, but because I know they live and breathe the mission. Did you feel that
absolutely.
way?
Oh, yeah. It's a huge, huge vote of confidence, right? Because, well, I'll share this story. When I worked for my first full-time job as a fundraiser was for a hospital down here in Orange, St. Joseph Hospital. And one of my responsibilities was running the employee giving campaign for the hospital. So as you can imagine, it's a big hospital. We're talking about multiple shifts. I was doing things like meeting with the phlebotomy department at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, because that's when their department meeting was, and giving them the opportunity to participate in this campaign. And what always struck me is these are people who are working incredibly long hours, incredibly hard work, and they still see the value of the mission and the opportunity to do good. And they say, yes, I'm going to donate X amount of dollars out of my paycheck every month or every other one, whatever it was. But they know everything about the organization, and they choose to raise their hands and say, yes, I believe in what we're doing, and I want to be a part of it even more than I already am. And it's just such a testament to a nonprofit's mission if the people closest to it are willing to and interested in supporting it.
Chris, I'm so glad you brought up the employee giving program because, like you said, it's a testament for the confidence that your colleagues have in the organization. And from a fundraising perspective, when a whole lot of people are giving back, it really does make a difference collectively for the bottom line as well.
It does. I will say that I think for smaller organizations, employee giving is probably should be approached with like extreme caution. Like you never want giving to feel like an obligation. So at the hospital, which was, a huge organization, there was so much remove. I was the one doing the asking most of the time. I had no authority or, I was not in any position to intimidate or feel like giving was meant to be. At a smaller organization, people might feel compelled to give in a kind of a bad way. So it is kind of a cautious thing. But for other groups, or especially for members of the board, incredibly important for members of the board of a nonprofit to be giving for the exact same reason, to be showing that they value the mission and they're willing not only to give their time, but to give some of their resources as well.
Yeah. And I used to do payroll deduction, and that's a great way to have just a small percentage of your total paycheck come out and give back. And, all of this is completely confidential and doesn't reflect any, hiring decisions or management decisions or anything like that.
Exactly.
It's just a feel good program.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for the employees of a nonprofit organization to feel connected to the mission almost beyond their day-to-day job. Like I believe if you can give employees another opportunity to really feel that connection, they're going to be happier and it's just going to be better for your kind of culture. I remember when I was at Habitat for Humanity of Orange County, we would have maybe once or twice a year a staff day where we all went to the build site and built together. And so for the folks on the construction team, it was just another day, unfortunately. But for the folks on the fundraising team or the accounting team who didn't get to do this all the time, it was a really tangible way to reflect on the mission because we were all able to take part of it and have some fellowship in that way.
That's terrific. Tell me the organizations you've worked for and the organizations that are your clients now. I'm just curious.
Sure. I've, like I said, I started with St. Joseph Hospital in Orange. I worked for, as I mentioned, I worked for Habitat for Humanity of Orange County for a while. I've worked for small nonprofits. I've worked for city government for a hot minute, which was a really educational time in my life, and which is code for saying it was kind of wild. But actually, I'll say this about working for. I worked for the city of Irvine doing sponsorship for a particular project called the Orange County Great Park. And one of the really key things I learned there was the difference between a culture that wants to do good and a culture that does not want to do bad. And at first glance, those two things seem almost the same. But when you start getting into it, you realize one is really predicated on risk taking and experimentation, and the other is predicated on kind of playing defense and not taking risk and protecting. And both have their value, but it's really important to figure out what culture is what, especially before you start working there, because you can be challenged either way. So yeah, I've been in the space for a while. My client list, I've only been in the consulting space for since late October. So it's very new and very exciting. I'm working with some great organizations though. I'm working with an organization called RevHub OC. And this is a group that is building what they're calling a social enterprise incubator or ecosystem here in Orange County. And a social enterprise is a company that has the drive and the mission of a nonprofit, but it's a for-profit company with the same for-profit ability to grow and scale. So these are companies that are designed to really address massive or significant societal problems or societal issues. And this group, RevHub, is making it so more of those companies can grow here in Orange County, especially companies that are led by women or BIPOC entrepreneurs, people that are traditionally underserved by traditional funding mechanisms. So that's a really exciting group to work with. I'm learning a ton. I'm working with Thomas House Family Shelter and South County Outreach, two different charities that serve populations of people who are experiencing or who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. I'm working with a group called the I Am Able Foundation. And this is an organization that's looking to really elevate and expand the conversation around neurodiversity, especially in the workplace. They call it invisible differences, and really trying to normalize those conversations to both empower individuals who think or process information in a different way, empowering them to learn about it and talk about it, and empowering others in the community who might think in more traditional ways of how to be better neighbors, better partners, better managers in that front. So I've been learning every day. I'm learning tons of stuff, and it's been a real exciting kind of change in my career trajectory.
That's terrific. Congratulations on your accomplishment for starting your own business and having clients. And I can tell the passion you have about supporting those organizations. And I just love hearing that energy come through.
Thank you.
And so that would bring me to my next point is, what do you enjoy about your work?
At its heart, I believe that my work, the work I do right now, is the most direct line, the most direct way I have to making the world a better place. That I'm not going to be the guy who's going to write multi-million-dollar check, but I do have passion, and I do have skills, and I do have connections, and I do have a great deal of societal privilege based on where I was born and how I look and how I sound. So, you know, I'm a white guy in a tie and a bow tie and a suit, and I got a beard and a college degree. I can go out there in the world and I can use these skills for good to help support other organizations and other individuals that share that belief with me that the world can be better than it is. So I think working in philanthropy in general, working in fundraising or alongside fundraisers, I just think it's the most, I won't say it's the easiest way because it's not easy, but it's the most direct way that I know that I can actually put what I believe into action and try to make things a little better in my corner of the world.
That's terrific. I love that. I'm curious, what you would say to some of our listeners who are maybe youngsters and or maybe older and thinking about a transition into or a start in the nonprofit field, what your advice would be for somebody who would be interested in a career like this?
I think if you're thinking about getting into fundraising as a career, I think you have to have two really important skill sets. You have to be passionate about the organization you're going to be working for. So if you're really passionate about animal rights, then you should be looking for charities that work in that space. If you're really passionate about affordable housing, same thing. If you don't have that passion, it's hard to get excited about it, and it's hard to communicate that. You also, I think, have to be there. There's kind of a misconception that in order to be a successful fundraiser, you have to be like 100% extroverted, always go, go, go. And I don't think that's true. I think the fundraisers that I've seen really make the most impact in the world. Some of them are very extroverted, but some of them are extroverted when they need to be, but all of them are very organized in thought. They're in planning. They're able to listen really closely and learn from organizations and individuals and try to make these connections. Because a lot of what fundraising is like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle of learning about what people value, lining them with what your organization does, trying to find that fit. So if your mind kind of goes in those directions, then I think can be a really rewarding and fulfilling career. If you can do it, volunteering is always a great way to get started, to learn about an organization, to understand its culture, to understand the people it serves and why it goes. I also tell people that, to remember, nonprofit is just a business designation. It's a tax designation. It doesn't denote anything particular. So not all nonprofits are created equal. Some are not great to work for. Some have very challenging or downright toxic cultures. So just as you'd be cautious about taking a job with a for-profit company, you need to be cautious and do your homework and learn what you can. Again, the advantage with a nonprofit is you can volunteer. You can kind of like get in there and learn and listen and talk to people. You don't always have that opportunity in a for-profit company. But then again, not everyone has that opportunity. They can't all just say, well, I'll work for free for a while and see what happens. So, but do that diligence and really find out, because if you match with the mission and you match with the culture, then, that's a really good place to start from.
And I think people don't understand that fundraisers can specialize and there can be large fundraising departments. For example, how many people did you work with at St. John's Hospital?
Oh boy, St. Joseph's there were probably at least 10 full-time fundraisers, myself included, because you had major gift and capital campaign and events and direct marketing. And it was a really big, So again, not all nonprofits are created equal. If you're looking at universities or hospitals, those are big teams. And I got my start in a hospital, and it was a great place to learn because I was working alongside some incredibly gifted fundraisers. And I was just able to kind of ride shotgun with them and learn how they held themselves in meetings, how did they talk about their donors when their donors weren't in the room? Like that level of care and professionalism you can really pick up on. Smaller shops, there might be one or two people doing fundraising. And so you're doing a lot more. And that can be another, that might be what you want. If you've got that kind of entrepreneurial can-do attitude, it can be really challenging and fun to get in there. But it is a complex field. There's a lot of specialization, a lot of great information and resources, a lot of bad information out there. You need to really, learn carefully, but there's a lot to learn. It's as I'm sure it's an art and a science, and you have to have a little bit of both in order to really make this a career.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was one of the first things the YMCA executive director said to me, is that fundraising is an art and a science, because you're on some level, you're looking at data, and the data are people.
Yep.
And then the art aspect is communicating with those people and,
Sure.
reaching them and touching them and communicating with them.
Right. Or you can, if I'm coming up to a meeting with Jen, I can study Jen's past donations and read the notes in the file and understand what I think Jen would be interested in. But when we sit down and start talking, you might present me with an opportunity to throw my initial plan away and go in a whole new direction. That's the art, where it's people and their passion and their values. And you can't go in and be like, well, I'm sorry you like project A, Jen, my studies show you should like project B. So I'm only going to talk to you about that. Like, well, if that's your attitude, you won't last long as a fundraiser. It's probably not for you.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. The donor is always right. You have to be a good listener.
The donor is often right.
Good point.
Often right. Because sometimes I think, and I don't mean that, I actually do mean that. Sometimes donors have really good intentions, but they don't know the whole complexity of the problems we're often trying to solve. So I think one of the challenges fundraisers have is, I think our industry has been kind of founded with this really uneven power dynamic between donors and fundraisers. And that may have been good once upon a time, but as the nonprofit space becomes more professionalized and skilled, there's no way somebody from the outside, no matter how much they love an organization, knows as much about the intricacies of a problem as the people who are like rolling up their sleeves and solving it. So that's my only caveat, is that sometimes a fundraiser a donor will suggest a solution which your organization may have already reviewed and dismissed. And if you're not confident enough to say, Jen, that's a really interesting idea, and we actually pursued that idea, and here's what we found, and that's why I think this idea might be better. If you're not ready to make that conversation and you're just going to be like, yep, Jen's writing the check, so that's what we're going to do, you could get into some trouble. You could pursue a solution that's not going to work, and that's not going to make anybody happy. So it can be a tricky relationship sometimes.
Yes. And as you were mentioning, fundraisers, the fundraising profession is becoming more professionalized. And in part, I believe it's because of the Certified Fundraising Executive certification that we both have. I know for me, I studied for 6 months for the exam and read different books and, have to keep up with my webinars and continuing education every year. How long have you had that certification for?
I'm going to look on the wall because I think I have mine posted up somewhere. 2011 was my initial certification. So I've reapplied twice now. That was a long time ago. Yeah, it was a real, actually, my first day at St. Joseph Hospital. So first day, first job as a full-time fundraiser, my boss at the time, Vicki Berry. Vicki sits me down, for the welcome to the team meeting. And, here's your office, here's your password, here's where the bathrooms are. And she said these two things. She said, one, join AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Join that organization. We'll pay for your membership. It's really important for you to join. Two, start filling out your application for your CFRE. And I said, oh, okay. And she goes, now you can't apply for the CFRE. Back then, you couldn't apply until you had 5 years of professional experience. And she goes, but that you got to write down like every meeting you go to. It's easier if you start now. And sure enough, 5 years later, when I realized it had been 5 years, it was so easy for me to submit the application and get qualified for the test because I'd started from day one on writing all that stuff down. So take notes.
We're lucky to have Vicki as a boss. That sounds
super lucky. Super lucky. She is a remarkable fundraiser and a great leader. And yeah, I learned a ton from her. Absolutely.
That's terrific. I'm curious if you mentioned that you kind of fell into fundraising, which is what a lot of fundraisers say. Most of us would say. And I'm curious if looking before you kind of fell into it, are there moments in time where you remember being a volunteer, or you remember some part of philanthropy in your life that impacted you in a way?
That's a good question. I mean, I can recall doing some volunteer projects in high school, when to try to graduate for stuff. I was involved in a youth ministry organization in high school, and we did some community outreach, community service type stuff. But I think what the real switch was for me was before I started working at the health system, I was a business reporter for the Orange County Business Journal. And that's where I discovered St. Joseph Health System. And I started to learn there's companies out there that this is a not-for-profit healthcare company. They've got community benefit programming as part of their core mission. And it really started to open my eyes to there's companies out there that are actively doing good. In this case, they were running multiple community clinics in underserved communities and making sure people had access to healthcare. And that really opened my eyes to be there's companies out there that are doing good as kind of part of their day to day. And then when I had the opportunity to go work for that company, I jumped at it. But growing up, I think I actually don't recall any specific volunteer opportunities that I took place in. I know it was something I did, but it didn't really start to really make a huge impression on me until, much later in my life.
Yeah. I always am curious because for some folks we hear in my interviews that it happened at a young age. For other folks, it's like you, where it was a later age. So I'm always curious about people's stories.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could tell me what your greatest source of inspiration is for what you do.
Well, my fundraising mentor was a gentleman named Frank Hall. Frank is the guy who first called me up and asked me if I'd ever considered doing fundraising as a career. And he was the head of that employee giving campaign that I was a part of. He was the ultimate head of that. And he's definitely an inspiration. He taught me lessons that I still learn today, that I still use today, that I still share today. Frank's the guy who told me, when he was explaining the difference between corporate giving and individual giving, Frank told me, Chris, just remember, dead people give away more money than live corporations every year. And every year I look at the Giving USA report, and every year I look at the difference between corporate giving and bequest giving. And I realized, yep, Frank was still right. Dead people give away more money than live corporations. But Frank was the first one to really show me that you could be a professional, make this part of your professional life, and actively make the world a better place. And I wouldn't be where I am today without him. That's for sure.
Wow, I just love hearing you talk about Vicky and Frank.
Yeah. I mean, this job's all about people, and there's so many really marvelous, exciting people in the fundraising and the nonprofit space. It's really, that's the other thing that's just a joy to be in this sector is just the people you meet are just some of the kindest and bravest and most creative people you could run into. It's always exciting.
Now, we talked a little bit about the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and I did mention in the introduction that you actually won Fundraiser of the Year.
I did.
That is quite remarkable.
I was shocked. Yeah, it was a huge honor. It's a peer. It was nominated by my peers, and it was a jury of my peers, so to speak, who did the selection. And I've been active in the chapter in Orange County for a while, off and on. I'm a little less so now, but I was chapter president once upon a time, and just got a lot of professional growth out of that. So to have them, give me that honor was a real, and it actually was, I was given that award just like 2 weeks before I launched my consulting practice. So it was a real affirming moment to be like, oh yeah, I'm going on this adventure, and I do know what I'm doing. I'm not, I'm not tricking myself here. I'm it just felt good to have the recognition of your peers.
Sure. That's a great way to start off a new chapter of your career.
Yeah, it was very exciting. Absolutely.
Excellent. So one of the things I always want to help our listeners think about is really their mindset when it comes to philanthropy. I've heard it said before that only 25% of Americans volunteer, but of the 75% who don't volunteer, 90% of them say they want to volunteer if they only have the time. So I'm curious what you would say to folks who are in that phase where they want to make a difference and support their community activities, but have some hesitations because of life circumstances or really just their mindset about volunteerism.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because your time is your time, and everyone's pulled in a million different directions. So I certainly understand not feeling like it. But if you're interested, I would suggest first I'd say that nonprofits need more help than you think they do. If you're sitting out there thinking, and if you also think that volunteering means you're doing a beach cleanup day or you're spending all day doing a thing, remember that there's a lot of skill-based volunteer needs out there. I've worked with volunteers in my professional career who did data entry work for me or database work for me, who helped with mailings, who would come in on special projects and do a couple hours of work here or there. It takes a little bit of time to uncover those. But if there's a mission you're passionate about and an organization that you feel like you could make a difference in, it's really worth your time to have a conversation with them and see what kind of help they need. Maybe they need someone who's good at putting, PowerPoint presentations together, or maybe they need someone to come and interview clients and, record their interviews or take notes of their interviews. Maybe you've got a background in desktop publishing or design, or your skill set can probably be leveraged to support the organization. And if the organization is at all on their game, they will meet you where you are, and they will give you the time that you need to give. Like, they're not going to say, well, yes, you can volunteer, but only if you give us 52 hours a week. They're, if they say that, you should run. They're probably going to say, what can you give? What are you interested in helping with? And I've had volunteers answering phones at organizations. I've had volunteers going out in the community and meeting with clients and helping with client services. I mean, there's really no limit to what you can do. But the trick is you have to take that first step. You have to pick up the phone or send the email and say, my name is so-and-so, and I'd like to volunteer. Here are some of the things I can do. They may have volunteer orientation. They may have more information online, but you got to take that first step. But I think if you take that first step, you will find yourself you will feel really rewarded. It is a rewarding thing to help. You will learn more, and you'll be surprised at how far your skill set can go in a nonprofit, because a lot of nonprofits, they're underfunded or they're understaffed and they're under pressure. If you can come in and help them even a little bit, even one couple hours a week can make a really big difference. And that's to say nothing of maybe there's product they need. Maybe they're if you're working with a shelter for people experiencing homelessness or a food bank, maybe you can do a food drive or a clothing drive or an item drive at your work or school or church. These are things that might not seem like a huge lift, but can make a really significant difference.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I just love how you advocate for the nonprofit sector, for volunteerism, for employee giving. We've covered some really important aspects that I haven't discussed in some of my prior interviews. So I'm so grateful to have another fundraiser, another CFRE. You and I are you're right in the consulting and fundraising field for many, many years. And I just love hearing some of the things that, I believe as well, and I've learned along the way. So I'm so grateful for having you here. And I just want to ask my last question for you, which is, what is your vision for making the world a better place, and the role that you play in it, and what you want to see in the future down the road, if all your dreams could come true about making the world a better place?
Wow. You saved the easy questions for the end of the podcast. I like that.
This is the finale question.
This is the finale. This is big finish. All right. So when I say the world a better place, you could use terms like safer, or healthier, or kinder. I think the world's a better place when more people have what they need to thrive and survive. I think the world's a better place when more people have the opportunity and the encouragement to do good for themselves and for each other. I think the world's a better place when we replace judgment with knowledge, when we learn more about people and more about what they're dealing with, and find ways to really be of service to them. I think we live in a society that largely idolizes and sanctifies cynicism and cruelty, and it does take time and effort and focus to break free of that. And I think a kinder world is one where more people are willing to be kind and empowered to be kind to one another, because not everybody has the same advantages. Some people are dealing with really heavy loads, and some people need help. And whether that help comes from government programs or social enterprise or nonprofit agencies, that's an argument for another day. The fact is, I think we all have a responsibility to give that help however we can and wherever we can. So where that means for me, I think how I'm making that happen is connecting with nonprofits that are actively engaged in this business of improving the world and helping them be more effective. I think a lot of nonprofits struggle with fundraising because ultimately they're embarrassed to ask for money, because we've been taught most of our lives that money is an embarrassing, weird, awkward thing. And so nonprofits internalize that, and they don't know, and they have to put up tricks or events or schemes to encourage people to give. And my vision is a world where nonprofits are bold enough to say, this is what I believe in, and I want you to join us on this cause. And if you want to join us, here's how you can do it. And you're never going to catch it. You're never going to connect with everybody. But if you're bold and clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, the right people will find you. So I think that's a lot of what I do at Resolute Philanthropy is connect organizations and hopefully empower organizations to have those bold conversations and to stand up for what they believe in. Because, if you won't stand up, if the nonprofit won't stand up and ask, then who will, right? And if the nonprofit won't get involved in making the world a better place, then who will? And if you, the person listening to this podcast, if you want to make the world a better place, you got to get involved. You got to get up and do it. You got to put some stuff at risk, right? Because it's risky. It's always easier to be passive. It's always easier to observe rather than participate. But I think if we're serious, really serious that the world can be better than it is, and I believe it is, I believe it can be, then think about how you can make that happen. Everybody has a part to play. So don't know if that landed where I needed it to land, but that's where it is.
I loved it. I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I want to make sure my listeners know how to find you. So your company is Resolute Philanthropy. ResolutePhilanthropy.com. ResolutePhilanthropy.com. Great.
Yeah. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, like so many of us. I am, that's my social network of choice. And I'm on there. There's not a lot of Chris Baiocchis, so you can spell my name in the show notes and you can get there. And I'm always talking about fundraising and the ways that we can get involved with it.
Great. Yeah. For my listeners, my show notes are on my website at youarephilanthropist.com. Thank you, Chris.
Jen, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and good luck with your show and all the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Chris. Talk to you soon.